Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Today is Sunday, the 26th of Sivan, June 6th. We're studying the entire Talmud one page at a time. Presently studying Masechet Shabbos, chapter 5, Parakeh, and that's Nun Dalid, Amud Aleph, and Amud Beis, 54a, and soon to be B. We're still going through the segment of the Gemara that's figuring out the proper handling of or managing of animals, livestock on Shabbos. And what we've been discussing thus far, and we'll continue to do so, is primarily the type of gear and stuff that one may place on their animal. In the course of this study, we are surveying the common ways that animals were cared for, protected, secured, and the like. And we're going through a number of items that are permissible, as well as a number of items that are prohibited. Our last conversation, broadly speaking, was on the subject of camels. And so we got a whole crash course on camel care. And that was the bulk of our discussions on Friday. We talked about how the camels might have their legs bound to prevent them from escaping, or one of the legs bound. We had the opportunity to take a moment to ponder the grammar and the development of the word akeda, akud, and dig a little deep into some of the commentaries on the story of the binding of Yitzchak as a bonus. That was our discussion on Friday. Then the last topic we talked about, was how the ropes between the camels are managed. And primarily, we spent some time talking about the prospect of kilayim, if the ropes were tied together or attached. And that was the discussion that we had on Friday, which is going to bring us to the very bottom of Nun Daled Amud Beis and just about turning the page to Nun Daled Amud Aleph 54a, and we're the final line turning to 54b. I'm going to share the screen here. This is where we're meant to be. And in a moment, maybe we'll take a peek at a manuscript, see if we can resolve an issue in the Gemara. I'm not certain we can, but maybe with your help, we'll figure it out. Here we go. All right, we're talking about the ropes with which the camel is pulled. And so we said you can't string them along. It looks like you're going to the marketplace. And then we said you can hold all the different ropes that are securing the camels in your hands, but you should be mindful about if they're tied together in the event that we're dealing with a shatnez concern. Again, that was Friday's discussion. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel adds to the subject of management, of carrying, leading, pulling the ropes of the camel on Shabbos. Where's Isaac Cohen Gadol on the call? No. All right. And so then apparently something that's going to sound surprising to some of you, or some of us, is that apparently it might be acceptable to be pulling or holding on to the rope of a camel, but there are many restrictions and things to bear in mind. You must be very mindful that you do not have a large amount of excess rope dangling. So imagine the camel's over there and you're holding onto the rope, securing it. How much additional rope is on the loose end of the rope? That's on the other side of your hand, if you will. And so Shmuel says only a tefach, only a handbreadth of rope is allowed to be dangling. So you shouldn't be having rope dangling down. Rashi explains, the end of the rope should not have more than a tefach going downwards. The dummy it will have the appearance as if he is carrying that extra rope. And it's not immediately evident that what's happening here really is simply securing the camels. From the words of Rashi, it seems like we're not talking about pretty clearly we're not talking about a biblical prohibition, but we're talking about an inappropriate appearance of carrying on Shabbos, and that's something that is occasionally taken into account. And here is such an instance. All right. The Gemara now has a question. How much dangling rope is allowed? We just read one handbreadth, but there's another quote of the Beit Tana, which is the school students, the people that were somewhat familiar and informed by Shmuel's opinion. We have a tradition teaching from the house of school, the house of Shmuel, the school of Shmuel. The students say that you're allowed to have two tefachim, two handbreadths dangling. So which one is it? One tefach or two tefachim? Is one tefach? When it's one tefach, it's so close to your hand, you understand that it's connected to a whole long rope tying the camels, or is it two tefachim? So the Gemara is going to answer. So I can imagine some of us are struggling here with.
Yeah.
Go ahead, doctor. You want to explain?
I mean, camels are not small animals. It's not a dog leash from a small dog. Okay. So how many leash? Forget about how much it could hang from your hand and whether or not you're allowed to tie it around to secure it. How many of these camel ropes is it reasonable to think? 2, 3? Okay. In other words, they don't want you to tie it as though you're selling 10 camels. There's no way that you could get, as I could envision it, more than 2 or maybe 3 ropes of camels, because they're spaced also for between them. So I don't know.
So let me make sure I'm explaining myself clearly. We're talking about imagine there's one camel.
Right.
So you've got. I'm securing my camel here.
Yeah.
I know I don't know if it's easy to see my screen, but you see it's taut over here. You know why? Because there's a camel at the other end. And so the camel's schlepping and I'm securing the camel. That's not a problem. It could be very long. It could be, I don't know, very long. But what's dangling down from my hand, that's not functional rope. That's just access rope. And so right now, our Gemara is commenting on the access rope. We don't want there to be a large amount of rope hanging because it has the sense, it's superfluous. It's not necessary for the securing of the camel. So you're carrying around the access rope, which is not being used for the securing of the camel. Now I'm talking on the fly now. So what I'm saying now is not, but I suspect that it would be acceptable to wrap the rope around your hand to give you more leverage and strength on the rope. But to have rope dangling down, not being used, ultimately what's happening here is you're schlepping the camel, but you're also holding this access rope. And so the Chachamim want us to be very mindful. It's Shabbos. We don't want us to create imagery or become comfortable carrying stuff, even though it's really secondary and it's all about the camel, beyond a small amount. So that's where the Gemara is coming. So we're not talking about the length of the rope to secure the camel. We're saying you got to do what you got to do. Your animal needs to be safe and preserved and secure. But be mindful not to have any extra unnecessary rope. That is what our Gemara is discussing. And then the Gemara asks, okay, 1 handbreadth worth of rope dangling down or 2? That's the Gemara's question. And the Gemara is going to answer another question that I know you're going to have fun with. Amar Abaye, Hashta da Amar Shmuel Tefach. We've got an issue. You've got Shmuel saying a Tefach, and you have the Beir Shmuel Tefachim, and they shouldn't really be contradicting each other. So the Gemara answers, Shmuel halacha l'maisa asa la'ashminam. Shmuel is teaching us how you should try to practice. And the Beis Shmuel are telling us the essential halacha. On occasion, there may be a license to do more, but there's the ideal practice. So ideally, you want to have very little rope hanging down. You want to keep it to 1 tefach. But the problem it's not really a major problem halachically until there's 2 tefachim. But we always want to stay away from the edge of the Shabbos abyss, or the edge. We want to stay far from the desecration of Shabbos. So technically, you can get away with 2 handbreadths. Ideally, it should be one handbreadth. Let's read it. Maybe Rabbi Steinsaltz will add some words that will help us out. Even though the Tanoim permitted pulling the camel for as long as less than 2 handbreadths of rope hanging below his hand, in practice, we should be a little more machmir and really leave as little as possible. I suppose the reason why there's an allowance for one tefach is because Ein L'Davar Soif. The tefach is roughly, this is just me totally making this up, but I mean, not making this up, trying to think here with you. Let's think about it. You holding a rope, you can wrap it around your hands. The tefach is roughly a hand breadth. There's always going to be a little bit of rope that doesn't wrap around your hand again. So there's going to have to be some kind of rope dangling. But if you're able to secure it, you should. 2 hand breadths worth can certainly be wrapped around one more time and further secured. This is just me thinking aloud, but that's my sense over here.
You probably don't want the just to be holding a straight rope and only have a one tefach on the other side.
Exactly. You don't want to be holding a stray rope beyond what's necessary. Yeah. So here, I don't know if you can see this. So here and again, I pulled.
You'll lose it.
Rabbi, you should have a camel so we could understand.
You
better,
know, I was considering. I was calling around some of these animal agencies to see if we could rent a camel for a day.
The camel escaped.
Rabbi,
but I wasn't trained in holding the rope exactly.
I have a lot of experience with this, Rabbi. I grew up very near to the Bronx Zoo, so
okay.
I did camel riding religiously and in Israel. So I want to make a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
We're not thinking how you usually schlep camels. What I've seen in terms of schlepping camels, we have 2 hands. And if you're going to schlep 2 camels, you don't necessarily use the same hands so they're on top of each other. You're in between and you tie to each of your hands and you're in between so they're not able to.
See, Doctor, I'm imagining that I would probably need my entire body weight and 2 arms and then some to just hold down a camel. So I'm having a hard time imagining securing 2 camels at all. But right now we're talking even about 1 camel. But here's what I want to show you. And again, I didn't see this in any of the commentaries, but I'm just thinking, you have dangling rope, right?
Right.
So if this is the amount of rope that's dangling down, I should just loop it around. But even after I loop it around, there's still a little rope left, and this rope can't loop around. So I think what Allah is saying is, look, there's a certain length of rope that's inevitably going to be dangling, or just about. That's okay. But as long as it's long enough that you could loop it back around and hold it in your hand, that's how it should be done. Again, no experience holding camels, admittedly, but that's this interesting discussion.
Trying to hold a camel with a headphone wire.
Sorry, yeah, you're gonna try to plug your iPhone wire into your camel. It's not gonna go. Let's see if there's any comments.
I think one of the problems is also to get the camel to move. No, Dr. Dr. Bernie. So you're gonna have to pull very hard, and you need that rope around you tight.
Right.
Let's read, just because we've got it here. Let's take a fast peek in the code of Jewish law. Hamoisi behema, you're taking out an animal, and you're schlepping it with a, what do we call this? Reins, a rope, whatever it is. Like to make sure the end of the rope does not protrude from the bottom of his hand. It shouldn't be more than a handbreadth below. It looks like it is akin to a person carrying that rope. And that part of the rope is not swept into or swept up with securing the animal. Okay, this is the next one, so we'll get there. But I just wanted to show you.
So wrapping it around the hand is okay then? I guess you have to, otherwise it'll get away.
I believe so. Again, these are not areas of halacha that I've had to study from my own personal experience, although it's always good to revisit. Well, let me just look at one more thing.
I imagine today's shilas will be more about your dog and walking your dog. And
exactly. It's actually, if you look in the halachic works that talk about dog walking, one of the things they actually talk about is to be mindful about the end of the leash hanging down, which is why, right? I think we even looked at it once or twice, which is probably why it'd be advisable to have one of those leashes that have a handle at the end, and so you're really holding the very end of the leash. Very interesting. The Shulchan Aruch Harav, he has a slightly more, well, basically, okay, essentially says the same thing, that we have to be very mindful, as the Shulchan Aruch says, our Gemara teaches us, it's like more that it should be less than a tefach, and certainly less than 2 tefach. Now we're going to continue, because we're not done with all of the laws about securing camels. And Dr. Hammer, I think some of your comments are going to be more, or what you were discussing in the beginning might relate more to this one. So we turn to the page. We're now on Nun Dalet Amud Beis, 54b. There is a brisa that says that all that matters is that the rope should be off the ground, the tefach. Now, how high is the person? Many more than 1 tefach from the ground. And so if you have to make sure that the dangling part of the rope that comes at the end of your hand, so the camel's here, and this is the rope that hangs down, if it just can't touch the ground, that's much more than 1 tefach. So what do we do with this text? What do we do with this brisa? So the Gemara answers, no, look again. Kitanya hi, chavlo de beini beini. This is the rope that's connected between the human's hand and the camel's neck or head or back or however exactly the camel is secured. That rope should be tight, it shouldn't be loose, and it shouldn't be drooping or sagging on the ground. Rashi, the chavlo de beini beini should be yodei legamo, the rope that's between his hand and the camel. Behahu ka'amar, kama deboyin heva, mavashi agbienu min hakarka tefa. You could be as long as needed, but make sure that it's tight and it's above the ground. So when you look at the rope, it's clear and evident that it is the animal that is pulling or being secured by this rope. It doesn't appear that what you're doing is securing the animal, and it has the appearance that the animal is carrying the rope. Maybe you too. Then it's not clear that you're holding or securing the head, the end of the rope on the camel's head. So 2 rules now we've learned from our Gemara. You shouldn't, have a lot of rope dangling below. Rope that's not used in the securing of the animal. And number 2, it shouldn't be sagging, it should be taut, it should be tight and above the ground, at least 1 handbreadth, if not more. Then when you look at it, or when you look at it yourself, what's happening, in fact, is, so it's not so much what others see. The fact of what's happening here is that the animal is being secured by that rope. I'm just going to add for you here. Shulchan Aruch says the same thing, that the rope has to be above the ground, the tefach or more, meaning be mindful to not leave a lot of slack between the rope and the animal. And realize that rope could be heavy if it's a lot of rope, to make sure that there's enough, if it's tight enough, that it will be above the ground. And so it's clear that the animal is the one that's pulling the rope, other end of the rope. And if the rope is really long, what do you do? So I may have misspoken, I don't know. But he says then wrap the access rope around the neck of the animal. Now, obviously, we're not talking here about suffocating the animal. We're talking about caring for the animal. So again, this is an area where bringing a camel in, as Beryl suggested, may have been helpful, but we're going to leave it at that. Let me just look at Rabbi Steinsaltz's Gemara, see if he provides us any illustration here. No. All right, let's go to the next Mishnah. It's going to be more on the subject of how to care for your animals, not care for them, but what they can do on Shabbos or how they can go out on Shabbos. And I think it's going to bring up a series of more interesting, thought-provoking items. New Mishnah. Ein chamor yotzei b'mardas bizman she'ena kishura. A camel mustn't go out in the public domain on Shabbos with a saddlebag or saddlecloth if it is not tied down. Does this sound familiar to anyone?
They're worried it's going
It should be familiar because in the previous Mishnah we discussed that a chamor can go out when it is tied down. Here I just changed the page to the previous Mishnah, which says chamor yotze b'mardas bizman shikshuraboy. So the Mishnah, the previous Mishnah teaches us a camel can go into the public domain if it is tied down. Our Mishnah teaches us that a camel cannot go when it is not tied down. And as you may recall, and we're going to jump back in a moment and look at it, there is relevance to exploring that text and this text, so stand by. But again, our Mishnah teaches us if the saddlebag isn't tied down, the camel mustn't go around with it on Shabbos.
We're doing a donkey, not a camel now. We're working.
I'm sorry, correct, I misspoke. Chamor means a donkey. Chamor means a donkey, correct. We're talking about a donkey with a saddle cloth, and it must be tied down. The loy bezug, nor should an animal, I guess we're talking about a donkey, should not go out with a bell. Apal pishu pakuk, although the bell has been stuffed up so that it doesn't make any noise. The loy besulam shevet tzavare, nor may an animal go out in the public domain with a ladder on its neck. Why would an animal have a ladder on its neck? The Gemara will discuss. Nor should an animal go out in the public domain with a strap on its leg. Let's look at the Rashis that have accumulated so far. Bizug, we said it is a bell. Ishklita, I actually opened up. We had this before, but anyways, it means a bell, in case you're wondering. Afalpi, even though it is stuffed up, you stuffed up the inside of the bell with cotton balls or something of that sort. Doctor, what do we say inbal was in English?
The clicker.
Tongue. Even though the tongue is not being mikashkesh, it is not banging around, and it's not producing sounds, it is yet prohibited, and the Gemara will explain why. Sulam, v'retsua, v'chol hanach, dimas nisin, the reference to a ladder and a strap and all the other stuff in our Mishnah, mifarish b'Gemara, mifarish b'Gemara. The Gemara is going to elaborate and explain. V'chulo, mishum dechayis alayu enough le'asil. All of the items here, and we'll see the Gemara, but Rashi gives us a heads up. It has to do with the fact that the owner does not want to lose them. The owner wants to keep them in his possession, and if it falls off, he would pick it up. The Mishnah continues, Ve'ein hatarne golim yotzim b'chutin. Roosters may not go out in the public domain with a certain kind of strings that were tied to their feet. V'lo gertzua shevet agleihem, nor a strap on their feet. Ve'ein hazacharim yotzim v'agala shetachas ha'alya shalahem, and rams are not allowed to go out with an agala, a wagon under their fat tails. Okay, I shouldn't say fat tails, it's under their tails, but we know that the aliyah tended to be quite, well anyways, they could drag on the floor. Rashi's going to explain. Agala, what's an agala? Karon katan, a little wagon. They would put under the tail. These rams had really fat tails. It was kind of like a pillow. And there wasn't a tailbone inside to control it. It was fat, fatty. And wide, and heavy. And when these rams that were, I guess, being, seems like they're being fattened up. When their tails drag on the floor, they become scratched and banged up. And it was common to make a little agala, mitgalgelet acharav, a little wagon under its tail, kishu haylech v'azonav kosher ala, and it was tied to the tail. I don't know if this was a common thing for all rams. I have a feeling not. I don't think rams in the wild would go and pick up their wagon. I have a feeling these were rams that were being bred for their meat, and maybe the tail was considered a high value item. Actually, we know this. You know the famous story from Sachin, where there was a person who was claiming to be, was it a Kohen or just a Jew? You know the story? And he says that he was going to go do the Karban Pesach, the Paschal offering, and so the rabbi was in Babel, tells him, go tell the Kohen, go make sure that you eat of the tail, which is the best part. When we made a big to-do about eating the tail, it was evident that he was an imposter because everyone knows that the fats of the tail are one of the parts of the. I'm mixing stories. I don't think it's a Karban Pesach, it's about other Karbanos. Maybe he was coming to be a Kohen, or we'll have to look it up. Anyways, the tails were fatty, and typically in offerings, they were part of the animal that was burnt. When it was the different offerings in the Beis Hamikdash. We'll have to look up that story and get it right.
Sounds like a tall tale to me.
Which story? No, it's a story about. We'll get there, and then we can assess it.
We have to see if there's an end to it.
Oh, good.
All right. I see a doctor. I missed it. I'm sorry.
It's the tall.
Gival, the tall tail or a wide tail? All right.
Also known as a Bubba Meinster. But
We'll soon need a cocktail.
Is Alan with us? No, Alan's not with us. I want to hear from Alan about in his pharmacy if they have their. All right. So this is our Mishnah step. Paragraph 2, the way Rabbi Steindl breaks it down. Final part of the Mishnah. They can't go out while they are in a state of chanunes. The Gemara is going to explain what that means. And a calf can't go out with a gimain. Also something the Gemara is going to elaborate. Nor a cow with a. Is there a difference between a hedgehog and a porcupine?
That's a sticking point.
Anyways, the Ora Kupar here is defined not just here, Lazira in the Rashi and elsewhere it's defined as a hedgehog. Nor may a cow go out with a strap between its horns. Ready for a story? The cow belonging to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, his cow did have this strap between its horns, and this was in defiance or not, or to the displeasure of the Chachamim. I just got to tell you, the Gemara is going to discuss the story. And Gemara is going to add a twist here that we'll see when we get there. Anyways, so that's our Mishnah. Let's go back to the top. A donkey cannot have an untied down saddle cloth, nor a bell, even if it's stuffed up, nor may it have a ladder on its neck or a strap on its feet. Chickens, roosters are also restricted. There was stuff that was
Rabbi, that would be my question.
There was stuff placed on their feet, and that they cannot go in the public domain on Shabbos. And then we said rams cannot have a wagon under their wide, not tall tails, and the sheep are chanunais. The calves cannot have a gimoin. I'm sorry, the Gemara doesn't explain. A cow cannot have the skin of a hedgehog, which was apparently placed on it, maybe for protection, but anyways, it's considered a burden, so maybe it's not protection. Nor these straps. And there's a story of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, whose cow did go out with the strap, and that was to the displeasure of the Chacham. That's the Mishnah. Beryl, you had a question?
Yeah, Rabbi, are we to presume when they say tarnagolim, they mean chickens in general? Because what would be the difference between a rooster and a hen? A hen also could run away, not as fast.
Let's see what the Gemara fills. Let's see the details that the Gemara fills in, and then we'll revisit the Ezer Hashem. What is a kupar? What is a hedgehog? Sheretz. It is a rodent. Shanimov chadin kemachat. That it's the threads of its hair are pointy like a needle. V'koyrim loy. Beryl, stay. We need you here because Alan, we have only one French speaker. Koyrim loy haritzon. The koshrim are bedade hapara, and they would place it on the cow's udders, shalayanukua shiratzim, to prevent other critters other than the children of the cow from suckling.
Sounds like a porcupine to me.
Sounds like a porcupine, but I think a hedgehog is the same thing, right?
Not exactly, no.
No, a hedgehog's a hedgehog.
Yeah, it's not a porcupine. It's different.
I'm gonna have to Google this, folks. This is important.
Hedgehogs don't have
No?
no.
Hedgehog.
Yeah.
You're saying it's less prickly.
Yeah.
I only know one hedgehog. His name was Sonic. Familiar with that hedgehog?
He has a hedge fund, that guy. Yeah.
That's why he gets hugged.
Why is there no reference to their?
It's a big thing in England. They have places where they can cross the road not to get killed. There's all kinds of stories in England.
Okay. I am an Am Haaretz in regards to the difference between porcupines and hedgehogs. Hedgehogs are easily recognized by their spines. This is Wikipedia. Obviously, you can't rely on Wikipedia for everything, but I think for this we can. Which are hollow hairs made of keratin. The spines are not poisonous or barbed, and unlike the porcupine, do not easily detach from the body. However, the immature animals' spines fall out. The adults come in. It's called quilling, and these can also shed when they're diseased. They roll into a ball when they're under a threat for self-defense. The spines point outwards, and here's a close-up of a hedgehog spine. As you can see, you'd probably rather not encounter it in the wild or on your cow. So anyways, there you have it. That's a hedgehog. I don't believe Florida has many hedgehogs. I may be wrong, but I've never seen them. All right. So anyways, this was used. Kupar. Sheretz, hu, shanim, and it's a rodent. I think this looks like a rodent. Look at that. That looks like a rodent. It's got these spines. Lazi Rashi. Erikon. Beryl. That sounds familiar?
Not to me.
All right. Anyways, the bottom line here is they say it's a hedgehog. Let's see further the Gemara. Or rather, let's see the Gemara. Now, this is a perplexing, not perplexing, but the Gemara starts off with a question. My time. Our Mishnah says that you cannot go out with a saddlecloth that's not tied down. My time, what's the problem? What's the big deal if the saddlecloth is not affixed to the animal? The Gemara answers, Kid Amaran. It's going to be what we discussed. Kid Amara. What did we say? So I just want to refresh your memory very briefly, and then I want to bring your attention to a machlokes of Rashi and Tosfos, which seem to have had different versions of the Gemara itself. Here's the Gemara. Amar Shmuel commented, when can you have your camel have a saddlecloth? Shekshur l'merev Shabbos. Again, this is a page, an entire two sides, one full page plus the V'hu shekshur l'merev Shabbos. It has to be tied before Shabbos. And indeed, our Mishnah, the Mishnah we're learning right now, is very medayik as such. It indicates as such, because it says ein hachamor yotzin murdas bizman shenikshur, like you can't go out when it's not tied down. You can go when it is tied down. Obviously, the Gemara understands that it must be tied down before Shabbos. Because hey, what are we talking about? If it's never tied down, period. Obviously, it's a problem. If it's entirely not secured, you'll end up carrying it. Rather, our Mishnah, the Mishnah we just studied now, not this text. It's talking about that it is tied down presently, but it's not tied down in Shabbos. So if it's tied before Shabbos, it's okay. If it's only tied down on Shabbos, it's not okay. Indeed, the Brisa says as such. That's it. Did anyone see an explanation for why you cannot have a saddle cloth on the animal? Did anyone see an explanation? I didn't. I didn't see an explanation. I saw two texts analyzed, and by the inference, it's acceptable. But I did not see any explanation. You hear my question?
Yeah,
No.
wouldn't it normally
But the
at
saddle?
night they would take the saddle off? What's the saddle doing on altogether?
Roberto, I'm going to ask you to try to answer that question. Do you remember why a donkey might need a saddle cloth? What do donkeys do?
Not the cloth, but the saddle.
The blanket. Why would a donkey
To
want
keep
the
them
blanket?
warm, to keep them
Keep
warm.
them
They're
warm.
cold.
So the agenda is to keep them warm. So there was two questions. Now let me just remind you. I know we're going back in time. There's a question if you could put it on the camel, the donkey at all on Shabbos. And then there's the question of can it go into the public domain? Here we're talking in the Mishnah about going to the public domain, right? A donkey may go into the public domain if it was tied down, and our Gemara says before Shabbos. But our Mishnah says it cannot go down if it was tied down on Shabbos. So let's go back to our Gemara now. My timer, what is the reason that a donkey may not go out with an untied down saddle blanket? Kidda Amaran, as we explained. So let's see what Rashi is going to say. What did we explain? So Rashi says, remember, remember the Gemara said that it wasn't tied down on Erev Shabbos, it was only tied on Shabbos. And then he says, by not tying it down on Erev Shabbos, he never made it evident that it was actually necessary. That he needs it for a clothing. If you put it on all of a sudden on Shabbos, it's not evident that it's needed. Haraya, it wasn't on previously. So Rashi explains that it needs to be put on the animal before Shabbos. Now it's clear that it is a garment for the comfort of the animal. And therefore, it may wear this garment wherever it needs to go, even in the public domain. That's what Rashi says. Let's hear Rabbi Steinsaltz. Rabbi Steinsaltz gives a different explanation. And I'm going to ask you if you could figure out why Rabbi Steinsaltz might choose to argue with Rashi. So again, our Mishnah says that a donkey cannot go out with an untied down saddle cloth. I'm going to read Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I want you to tell me if you can pick up the chiddush of Rabbi Steinsaltz.
The same thing as before, that if it falls off, you might carry it.
So let's read it. Hold on. What is the reason? As we stated above, there's room for concern that when not secured, the saddle cloth is liable to fall off the animal's back. If it's not tied down, it's going to fall off. Its owner may come to retrieve the saddle cloth in the public domain. So Rabbi Steinsaltz explains our Mishnah to say that it's going to fall off and you might carry it. Rashi says an entirely different scenario. Why does Rashi and Rabbi Steinsaltz have to argue here? Understand my question? Rabbi Steinsaltz and Rashi are reading the same words and giving two very, very different interpretations.
Rashi was 800 years earlier.
I'm sorry?
Rashi was way earlier.
So why does Rabbi Steinsaltz argue with Rashi?
Rabbi, I have a
Yes.
throw in a problem there. Hypothetically, if before Shabbos you have the saddle cloth, but it's not tied, which I think is often the case if you put a saddle today on a horse, you don't tie the blanket underneath. You put the blanket and immediately you put the saddle. And because the saddle cloth is not going to fall off as long as the saddle is there, which is tied. So
Right.
So if you have an animal, okay, let's say a chamor, it doesn't matter what it really is. And the main concern is that you're going to land up picking up something because it's going to fall off on Shabbos,
Mhm.
that is obviated by the situation I gave you. So you might ask, but why would you have a saddled, let's say a chamar
Mhm.
waiting there? Well, I don't know, but maybe it's really cold, and the animal gets even more heat when there's not only a blanket, but there's a saddle on top of it also. So, so I'm just saying that
So
I'm
you're
looking
saying,
at the reason for not doing it is because it's going to fall off. If there were a saddle there done before Shabbos, it wouldn't fall off, and therefore maybe it's a different situation.
interesting.
Did we also figure out what a ladder was, or we didn't comment on
No, no,
that?
no. We're going step by step. We're first
Oh,
commenting on the
we
first.
didn't come there yet.
No, no, not at all. No, we're gonna get
Okay.
there soon. So there's basically two ways to understand this Gemara. One is in the light of the Gemara's previous comment. The Gemara's previous comment about a donkey, which is that it was tied down on Erev Shabbos. And then there's in the light of the general principle of if it falls off, you may come to carry it. And they really can't really coincide. They can't be the same explanation. Rashi says the words Kedamaran indicate that it was the specific discussion about donkeys. However, Tosfos, that I have to stop early, so we're gonna have to continue this tomorrow. Tosfos had a different version of the Gemara. Tosfos read explicitly, my taima. Look at what is the reason that you cannot go out with an untied saddlecloth? Dilma enough of asil asuyi. Tosfos had the words in the Gemara, lest it fall and you'll end up carrying it. And so, for whatever reason, Rabbi Steinsaltz, I think it's because it's a more simple explanation. Oh, let me back up. These are my final comments. The Gemara never explicitly explained why it needs to be tied before Shabbos. Rashi deduces and infers a reason. The word Kidamaran indicates an explanation that was given by the Gemara. What's an explanation given by the Gemara? That you might carry it. The problem is it creates a contradiction in the actual topic of how to handle your donkey. Tosfos has the words Dilmanaf of Asil Asuye. Maybe you're going to carry it. And that's a simpler explanation. It's an explanation that's previously brought in the Gemara. And evidently, Rabbi Steinsaltz embraces Tosfos' understanding of the Gemara. Rashi, however, apparently wants the Gemara to be consistent with the page prior, and therefore needs to put it at that. I'm sorry for leaving this not entirely hashed out, but I wasn't looking at the clock. I do need to go now. I want to thank you all for joining us. And with Hashem's help, tomorrow we'll just hash this out one more time. I think we'll read through Tosfos. I think you'll enjoy it, and then we'll go on to talk about what's wrong with bells and what's a ladder, and some other good juicy stuff.
Also, why we use just the male and not chickens and chickens.
Yeah. We're gonna go through the Mishnah.
Don't eat the chicken yet. Leave it for tomorrow.
Rabbi, may you continue to have nachas from all your children and go to many, many graduations.
Amen.
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 Thank
you all. Have a wonderful day. Let's hear lots of good news for all of Klal Yisrael.
Since we're in French, à demain.
Koyach.